everyone, and welcome to the Virginia MRC November 2020 Election Infection Prevention Ambassador Training. We are so excited to have you here tonight, and thank you so much for attending. So I'd like to introduce you to a couple of our speakers tonight. So first off, we have Jessica Bowman. She is the Chief Deputy of the Department of Elections. We also have Jennifer Goodnight, who works in public health and is a representative from our Northwest MRC. And also myself, I am your Virginia MRC COVID-19 coordinator. And then as I mentioned, Pat Minen is in the chat box, and he is our COVID-19 Western Region coordinator. So what we're going to talk about this evening is we're going to review over the purpose of the VA MRC and what we do with the elections. We're going to be talking about daily polling location operations for November the 3rd, election regulations, and then also the role of IPAs and ways that you can, education and strategies that you can take on to help you through the day that day. Also, we're going to be talking about communication guidelines and your volunteer responsibilities. So I'm really excited to introduce you now to Jessica Bowman. Jessica?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Bowman, and I'm the Chief Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Elections. Tonight, I'm just going to walk you through some basic election 101 things and some things from our side of operations that you will see in polling locations. Once again, we want to thank you for being here and thank you in advance for your service on November 3rd. It's not all the time that we get to do such a big cross-agency project, and this has been great. We did these in May and June. IPAs helped us out then. So looking forward to November. For those who volunteered possibly in May and June, expect November 3rd to be a bit different. We here at the department look at it as May and June were sort of a scrimmage if you're a football fan, and November 3rd is our Super Bowl. So it's a little different. So what is going to be on the ballot? What are people voting on? The president, obviously, presidential election, congressional, local offices such as Board of Supervisors, mayoral races, state constitutional amendments. There are 2 of them. You will see people at polling places handing out brochures from the Department of Elections that explain these constitutional amendments because, of course, they were written like they will be in the Virginia Constitution. So there's a big layman term explanation for what those mean. So you may see brochures being handed out in line. And then local referendums. So everything from mills tax to casinos is a big one this year. So local questions. I will say while we're on this slide, if you have not made a plan to vote and plan to volunteer in November, please vote early. You can vote any day up until October 31st, excluding Sundays, but both Saturdays. You can also still request an absentee ballot. That cutoff is this Friday, and mail it in or drop it off at a location. So if you haven't made a plan to vote and plan to volunteer, please vote early. Next slide. So who is in a polling place? Each precinct or polling place must have 3 officers of election. One is a chief and one is an assistant chief. Those 2 officers will be your best friends while you are volunteering. Those workers have experience. They're connected directly to the General Registrar's office. They answer questions. They report everything to the General Registrar at the end of the night. They're also in charge of making sure that overall operations go smoothly. Others, you'll have everyone from greeters at the door, line monitors, making sure lines are going smoothly. You'll have poll book officers, people that are checking people in to vote. That's usually done on a computer or a tablet. You'll have voting equipment officers, so people that are standing by the machine in which people scan their ballots. You could have some high school pages, and these are high school students that have volunteered and are in a page program to help set up or break down equipment. And then you can also have some electoral board members who are also in charge of overall operations of the precinct. People outside, so people, party representatives or candidates can what we call electioneer outside. That's 40 feet in front of the entrance to the polling place. So you could have a lot of people out there. And then other people inside the polling place but will not be working. You could have observers, people who are just watching things going on. Could be from parties usually, so one from the Democratic Party, one from the Republican Party. You could also have neutral observers, especially in a presidential year. We will have international observers that come and watch our process, how we do things in the United States. And then also, not that this happens infrequently, but in case you see it, candidates are given the right to enter a polling place for 10 minutes at a time, just to see how things are going. But they cannot solicit or campaign or anything of that nature in their polling place when they go for 10 minutes. But you may see a candidate pop in and pop back out. So a lot of people can be in a polling place. You know, this year especially, we're going to have to keep in mind social distance rules and where would be appropriate for all these people to be placed. Next slide. Timeline of Election Day. I won't lie to you, it's a very long day. Officers of election arrive at a polling place around 5 a.m. Polls open at 6 a.m. And then they close at 7 p.m. If people are in line at 7 p.m., they can vote. So sometimes on a really busy day on a presidential year, you could have people voting up until 7:30 or 8 o'clock. What usually happens is at 7 o'clock, someone will go outside and either give tickets to everyone standing in line, or the last person in line, you know, they'll have someone go to the very end of the line at 7 to notate that. Will observers, I see a question real quick, will observers be identified with a badge, name tag, etc.? Yes, so they will have letters of authorization that they will give to their chief polling officer. The normal busiest times for Election Day is exactly when you think they would be. So they're in the morning when people are going to work, they're at lunch, and they're in the evening when people are going home. So usually right at 6 a.m. you'll have a line. Sometimes you may have lines starting at 5 p.m. and then you'll have a little pop around noon. Next slide. So the voting process, hopefully this is nothing new, because hopefully you voted before. It can be a little different in each precinct, but it's pretty simple. Voter comes in a polling place. There's usually a check-in table. An officer of election checks them in on a poll book. Like I said, it's usually a computer or an iPad. All localities will have paper backups, poll book backups this year. So, you know, if something doesn't work, because technology can sometimes be interesting, they can use that paper backup that will have the list on it. The voter gets their ballot. They go into a little booth or something privacy-wise. They mark their ballot and they insert it into a tabulator. And then they receive an I vote sticker, and then they're along their way. So it's not too long of a process usually. Next slide. Alternative voting processes due to COVID-19. This year has been unlike any other, I think is an understatement. In some localities, registrars, electoral board members have put some processes in place to help, spread out people, make people safer due to the pandemic. Not all these are practices in all polling places or all localities. Some aren't needed, but this is just some things to keep an eye on. Some localities are encouraging more than normal curbside voting or drive-through voting. I do not believe there will be any precincts in November that will be exclusively drive-through like we had back in May and June. But this is a process where people vote in their car. So curbside, literally pulling up to a curb and voting in their car. An officer of election will go help them with that. Or they could have brought someone to assist them. Combination of polling places in one physical location or an outside location. Some people have combined polling places because of lack of space due to COVID-19. For instance, a lot of churches have decided they did not want the public in there during this pandemic. So localities have had to move polling places around. However, Virginia has very strict laws about when you relocate a polling place. So you will not see big arenas like you may have seen on the news for some other states. I know a friend of mine voted in Fenway Park, which I thought was pretty cool in Boston. But nothing like that here. Usually these take forms of a big high school, and a polling place is in a gymnasium, and then one is maybe in an auditorium or another big space. You'll see a lot of localities that have put in place how you exchange the photo ID or how a voter shows that ID. Some people are using clipboards or pieces of paper so they don't have to touch anything. You'll also see sneeze guards or shower curtains that have been installed to protect officers of election. Some are using disposable pens and folders, so the voter actually takes the pen that they mark the ballot with them. Sometimes localities use a folder to put a ballot in for privacy, so you're very sure that you can't see how someone voted. And some localities are just telling the voter, hey, take it with you. They are limiting the number of people inside a polling location. So, this will cause lines to be outside. Hopefully it's good weather, but that's something to look out for. And then socially distant signs, signage for standing in line. So like we've all seen in grocery stores and everywhere else we've been, a lot of localities will have signs on the ground or some kind of marking to encourage people to stay that safe distance apart in line. Next slide. So the state has given localities a big thing of PPE supplies. That includes masks, and this is for staff, but not for the voters. Gloves, face shields, hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes. And then localities have also gotten their own supplies if they needed anything to supplement it. Some localities have masks for voters. We'll get into that a little bit, or volunteers that have made cloth masks for voters. But they do have a supply of PPE just for elections. Next slide. So voters wearing masks. You will see a lot of news about this, and it varies by state. And so just so we're clear, the Department of Elections, along with the Virginia Department of Health and the governor's office, we highly encourage and expect voters to wear masks while they're standing in line and in the polling place. However, a voter may not be turned away from voting if they refuse to wear a mask. if a voter refuses to wear a mask, there are some precautions or some steps that an officer of election may take. So they could be asked to put one on. They can be asked if there's extra available, offer them a mask. They may offer them to vote outside or curbside voting that I mentioned earlier. And if none of that works, if they just refuse to wear a mask, they can be let in a polling location to cast their ballot. We have encouraged officers of election, and will encourage you, that if that were to occur, please keep the interaction as brief as possible. As we all know, doing an extenuating interaction with someone talking possibly close to you and them not wearing a mask is not safe. So in those situations, it is best just to get a person in and out, and not have a 30-minute argument prolonging the risk to an officer of election or voters around them. So that is a big one. I think there will be a couple of news articles in Virginia about it tomorrow, but that is the policy. So that is, it is what it is. Officers of election wearing masks. So if they should be wearing masks, however, that authority is with local electoral boards. So I nor the department hires 15,000 poll workers. That's usually what it takes around about in a presidential election. They are hired by localities. So if an officer of election is not wearing a mask or something of that nature, you should talk to the chief election officer about that, and they will handle that situation. Presidential elections and hashtag 2020, because hashtag 2020 I feel incorporates all the things this year. So presidential elections are our highest turnout elections. That's not rocket science. You don't have to be an election expert to figure that out. Pretty simple. In 2016, we had over 4 million voters vote in the election. So almost 4 million people doing the same thing in the same 13 hours across the Commonwealth is pretty crazy. Long lines. There are long lines in presidential years. There's no getting around it. I personally stood in line in 2016 to vote for about an hour and a half. So, don't be surprised. We've seen long lines with early voting. I do want to make you aware, as health experts, other health issues can occur during this, right? So older people or people that may get overheated if it's warm outside that day for some reason. So just be aware, that can happen. We've had it happen. People faint in line, standing there for a couple of hours. So, that is usually handled with the chief election officer, but don't be caught off guard. It's happened before. And early voting, absentee voting, this year we have seen just extraordinary numbers, with 1.4 million of Virginians have already cast their ballot, and we still have 2 weeks to go before Election Day. And I say that because I don't know if that means Election Day is going to be slower than normal, or if we're just going to have even a bigger turnout than we've had in 2008, 2012, or 2016. And as we say, we got out of the prediction election business a long time ago at this agency. So I can't tell you that, but that could be a possibility if your precinct is not busy and you're like, she told me it was going to be crazy. It could be just because everyone decided to go early, which is a good thing. Voter intimidation. This has been on the news a lot and will continue to be. If someone comes up to you, a voter, and tells you about a problem, if they don't feel comfortable or if they were intimidated, please take them to the chief election officer in that polling place. The chiefs are trained to handle situations like that. So if that happens to you, go to the chief and they'll handle it. And then stuff happens because hashtag 2020. So there are some common problems that happen every election day. And it does not mean that the world is ending. It does not mean that Russia is here. It does not mean someone's trying to rig the election. It's just, we have about 2,600 polling precincts, and not everything is going to go perfect at all 2,600 at 6 a.m. in the morning. So some things that might happen that you may see: the power goes out. I don't know how it's possible, but every election day I've worked, somewhere in the Commonwealth, the power is out, even if the weather is beautiful. When it last happened, it was because of a squirrel. Like, a squirrel literally got into a transformer and got fried, poor squirrel, and took the power out at a polling place. So some things you just can't control. Equipment malfunctions. I talked about technology earlier. We've all went to work or woken up one day and for some reason our computer doesn't turn on, or our phone freezes, and it worked perfect yesterday, but the day you really need it, it just mysteriously doesn't work. Sometimes people don't show up and they flake out. And then sometimes you're just in a rush, and we've had poll workers forget the keys to unlock a building before. And I say all that because elections is a very human experience. It's humans running it. It's normal people, just like you guys are. Officers of election are paid, but I think if you counted up all the hours it works, it probably equates to $4 an hour. So they're not in it for the money. So if any of that happens, know that poll workers, general registrars, us here at the Department of Elections, we are prepared to mitigate any of those things that happen. It is not unusual. Once again, 2,600 things going all perfect at 6 a.m. in the morning doesn't usually happen. Next slide. Key things to remember. I've said this quite a few times in this presentation. If you have any questions or concerns, you can always talk to the Chief Election Officer or whoever she may have assigned as your contact. We are fully aware that you are not there to operate elections. You are not a substitute for that. And we really don't want you to feel obligated or unnecessarily put yourself in a position. Just like we're not the health experts, you guys are not the election experts, and trust me, you don't necessarily want to put yourself in that position. So anything you see that you're bothered by, or any questions you have, ask your Chief Election Officer. Voters can get agitated for a variety of reasons because it's the public, and I'm sure all of you guys have worked with the public at one day or another, so people can get agitated. Election officers, once again, are used to it and trained for a variety of situations, such as if someone, isn't on the poll book, or someone requested an absentee ballot, but they didn't get it in the mail and now they want to vote, or, vote on election day. All those things, election officers know what to do. If for some reason things are slow at your precinct, so maybe everybody went and voted early and you have some downtime, it can be a bit easy to talk about the election because it's what's going on around you, right? So it can be easy to talk about that. Elections are conducted in a nonpartisan manner. So please, refrain from talking about campaigns or candidates, even if you're just having general conversations inside polling places. It's just better for everyone. And then if you can't show up on election day, if something happens, if you have a family emergency, if you're not feeling well, because we don't want people not feeling well in our polling places, of course, please just make sure you contact the person who is coordinating your placement ASAP. Whether that's, don't worry about, hey, it's midnight, I'll just call them in the morning, or hey, it's 4 a.m., I bet they're not up yet. Please do not do that, whether it's an email or phone call. Please tell someone that you're not going to be where we thought you would be, so that we can fill that space if we need to, and it's not unexpected. Once again, I want to thank you guys for your time this evening and on election day. We are so thankful that you will be there to help Virginians be safe while they exercise their right to vote. So thank you. I'll be hanging around for a couple of minutes. So if anyone has any questions before we go to the next presentation that deals with elections, happy to take those quickly.
Jessica, we have a couple questions from the chat room.
Okay.
One question is, will there be a police presence since there's been so much divisiveness during this election cycle?
Yeah, so there will not be police permanently at any polling locations. We work really closely with local law enforcement, state police, the Department of Homeland Security, and even the FBI. But we do not have like stationed uniform officers at polling locations, as their presence can be, not either A, not needed, or B, it's just a tough situation sometimes having armed police at a polling location. But they are on alert that day if anything is needed anywhere.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. If you see an election worker who's maybe not wearing a mask, and maybe they should be if they have a cough, and the chief doesn't really handle that, is there anything else our volunteers should they just call someone with the MRC, or should they call the registrar?
Yeah, if they're really concerned about what's going on in a polling location and the chief is not taking care of it, I would encourage them to contact their coordinator at MRC.
Okay. And I think the only other question was, if the voters are in line at 7 and say they're going to be voting until 8 or 9, should we stay that whole time, or just as long as each person, volunteer, can stay?
That's something you can also talk about with your coordinator. I know everyone's doing it a little differently. And I know the need is a little different everywhere. So I know some volunteers are only going in during those peak times or in shifts. And of course, if your shift is over, you can leave. I mean, no one is, going to keep you there till 9 p.m. till every voter has voted. So I would say no, but definitely talk to your coordinator about that.
Okay. I think that was all the questions that were specifically for you, Megan.
All right. Thank you so much, Jessica. We so appreciate you taking time out of your day to answer all of these questions and to present tonight. We really appreciate it and learned a lot tonight. So thank you so much. And I know you said you may be hanging out for a minute, but I understand you have another meeting to attend to. Election season, it's busy.
It is.
All right. Thank you so much. So next we're going to have a bit of a presentation from Jennifer Goodnight. She's going to be talking about our Infection Prevention Ambassador operations, responsibilities, and safety. So take it away, Jennifer.
Thank you, Megan. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can.
Awesome. So welcome, everyone. I've seen a lot of questions coming in about exactly what infection prevention ambassadors do. So I am watching these questions, and many of them will be answered in this next section. But feel free to type out any questions that I don't answer, and we'll address them at the end of this section. So next slide, please. So why do we want the MRC to help out with elections? Well, as Jessica aptly put it, hashtag 2020. Everything seems crazy this year. But in general, the MRC can be very helpful in providing a public health presence during this pandemic. We can help with election officers are going to be focusing on the election and how to make sure that the election is fair. We are here to focus on how to minimize the infection risk to the voters and to those working in the polls. So we can help out and be the eyes and ears for public health while the election officers are doing their jobs. And as Jessica said, our job is to focus on the public health piece of it. We are not there to run the election. We are not there to answer complicated electoral questions or anything like that. We're just there to provide the public health support. Next slide, please. So what does an IPA do? We're the public health champions. We're there representing the Virginia Department of Health and the MRC. So everything that you do that day, make sure that you reflect positively on VDH and the MRC group. We're not responsible for the voting process. And also importantly, we are not the cleanup crew. So if you go to your site and you're told that your job is to clean after every voter, you're not going to be serving the whole day at the election. The shifts are going to be at most 8 hours long. And we'll talk a little bit about how that's assigned and how that's going to vary by location. But you're not going to be there the whole day. So the election officers need to figure out how to get a rhythm going as far as cleaning. And we'll talk a lot more about this in my slides without you, so that you're not the cleaning crew that's going to just be cleaning. Your job is to have your eyes on the situation and see what are opportunities for minimizing infection risk. You can help them with cleaning, especially when it gets busy. You may be assisting with some of the cleaning if they have more people taking identifications. You can also help them figure out how often to clean, but your job is not to be that cleaning crew. Next slide, please. So we reduce infection risk for workers and for voters. And I say reduce because we're never going to be able to make it zero risk. We have to reduce it as much as we can. And we do that by determining what actions we and the polling workers can take to help minimize infection risk, not only while the voters are there, but also before they arrive. So some of the polling station time shifts may start before the voters get there. As Jessica mentioned, the officers are there before the voters are so that they can set up. And some of us may be called to do the same thing, to get there before the voters actually walk in and help set up the day, talk about the walking path, etc., for when the voters are coming in. And we also are there to identify challenges that come up. What happens if the line gets longer? What happens if it gets colder or the weather turns and it's harder for people to wait outside? We can help address those as they come up. Next slide, please. So hopefully you've seen the job action sheet. It's on the MRC website, but if you have not, I know a link will be sent out for it. But the job action sheet has a lot of good information for you. So it does have our mission, as well as some administrative information about how we'll be serving on election day. You will be stationed inside a polling place. You'll have an 8-hour maximum shift, and you will have breaks and be able to grab a meal if you want, but you should bring your own food. You won't have food that's provided for you. Make sure you wear comfortable clothing. Make sure you wear comfortable shoes. Make sure you bring your MRC badge if you don't have one yet. Make sure you talk to your MRC unit coordinator, and again, we'll have information about how to contact them if you have any questions. And make sure you wear your MRC shirt as well, so that you're clearly identified as the infection prevention ambassador for that day. Before you deploy, you should make sure you've completed the background investigation, the MRC orientation, and of course today's training. And again, contact your MRC unit coordinator if you have questions about any of this. As you open the job action sheet, you'll see other information, some of which we'll go over during these slides. But again, please, please read this worksheet before you get deployed on November 3rd, because it goes over actions you should take for yourself, such as making sure that you stay at home if you're not feeling well that day, if you have any of the CDC symptoms of COVID, or if you've within the last 14 days been in contact with somebody who was diagnosed with COVID or who's strongly suspected to have COVID. Make sure you wash your hands frequently, wear a face mask, all these guidances that we're pretty familiar with by now. Make sure that you wear your own mask and that you document everything that you've done that day on your job action log, which is also on this worksheet if you open it up. And make sure that when you get to the site, you've logged your hours afterwards, and once you're at the site, that you're aware of and implementing the CDC guidance. So this job action sheet has a list and links to the CDC guidance that we're going to be referencing a lot for the rest of this presentation. Hand hygiene, respiratory etiquette, face coverings and which are appropriate, maintaining healthy environments with surfaces that are touched, making sure that they stay clean, social distancing. These are all things that you're likely to be asked about that day. So make sure you're very aware of CDC's guidance, CDC's requirements, and all of these links that are provided on this sheet. So start by staying healthy before election day. Make sure you practice physical distancing when you leave your house. Wear your mask, use hand sanitizer if you can't wash your hands. Washing your hands is always best. And make sure you avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth when you're out in public. Next slide, please. And if you're sick, I highly suggest take a thermometer and take your temperature before you deploy that day, just in case you have a temperature. Again, as Jessica said, please notify someone as soon as possible if you can't be at your site. But we don't want someone who has a fever or who has other symptoms showing up to the site. Seek medical attention if you have any of the symptoms. And contact your MRC coordinator if you become a close contact with someone or you become symptomatic, because we don't want people who could potentially spread COVID working the polls on November 3rd. Next slide, please. So as you can tell, we really want to make this point clear. Don't report to a polling site if you have these symptoms: cough, shortness of breath, fever, chills, muscle pain, headache, sore throat, loss of taste or smell. Make sure that you're aware of how you're feeling that day. And if you develop those symptoms over the course of the day, please go home and seek medical attention. Next slide, please. So once you get to the polling location that day, it's best to arrive on time. Again, we have that short window to prepare for the voters to get there. First thing you want to do is find the election chief. So as Jessica mentioned, the election chief is going to be your best friend that day. They're the person that you want to ask most of your questions to. They're the ones who are going to be in charge of your polling station, and they're the ones who are very experienced. They're also going to be potentially very distracted that day. They've got a lot of things to manage, even before COVID. So they may not be remembering that you're coming. So walk up to them, say, "Hi, I'm the infection prevention ambassador." You can name what health district you're representing, or say you're from the Department of Health, and say that you're here to help with infection prevention today. But they are generally aware that we're coming. And ask them how you can best support, and if there's anything that they've identified that you can help with, as well as start your own checklist of actions, which we'll go over in a second. So next slide, please. So as Jessica mentioned, the election chief is there to resolve issues, get resources for you, and interact with the media and any other complicated election questions that come up. Even if there's something that you're not sure of, it's a good idea to run it by the election chief, because that's the person who's going to be essentially supervising you all day and making sure that you and they are working together effectively. Next slide, please. So some of the polling stations may have staff getting temperature checks. This is not temperature checks for voters. As Jessica said, we cannot turn voters away, even if they're symptomatic. We cannot. So we would only be taking temperature checks potentially, this will not occur at all sites, but potentially for those who are working the polls to make sure that they are healthy and safe to be working the polls that day. And if you are doing this, it's a touchless thermometer, a non-contact thermometer. You want the person to move their hair out of the way or remove a hat if they have one. You would aim it at their forehead, push the button, and you get the results in a half a second. So according to CDC, we're looking for a temperature over 99.5 or close to 100, depending on your age. So if you see somebody with a fever, let them know, let the election chief know that the person does have a fever. Of course, if you think the machine may have malfunctioned, check again. But if somebody has a fever, again, we don't want them working the polls that day, but the election chief's job is to figure out what to do if somebody on their staff has a fever. It's just our job, if they ask us to take people's temperatures, to do so. They need to figure out what to do next. And hopefully nobody does have a temperature. And again, this won't occur at all polling stations, just if you're asked to do so. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are we going to do before the voters get there? Well, some of the preparations involve the layout of the building. As Jessica mentioned, there's going to be totally different polling places across the state. So you may have a high school, you may have another type of building. And think about the building that you're in. And first of all, how to maximize fresh air. We're all hoping for good weather on November 3rd, because that would help us be able to prop open doors, for example, and maximize fresh air that way. If you can prop open doors, weather permitting, please do so, because that helps get some air circulation going, which is safer for COVID. You also want to think about the layout of the building for the sake of having a one-way walk through the building, if possible. At my last place that I went to, we ended up propping open a second door in another part of the building so that voters could walk in one door, give their identification and vote, and walk out another, so that they had a one-way path and we're not crossing each other in and out over the course of the day. So think about what doors could you open? And again, you have to work with the election chief and the other people who are working at that station to make sure that these are secure ways to vote, and make sure that they approve of everything that you suggest. Everything that you, or all the guidance that you give, is just a suggestion that needs to be approved by the election chief. You can consider propping open doors. Those door handles can be really high touch surfaces. If every single voter has to open that door all day long, that's a lot of people touching the same surface. You can consider opening windows. And of course, there's cleaning solutions. So we're gonna have another slide on cleaning solutions in a second, but you'll look at what solutions you have available to clean, make sure that they're labeled properly, and make sure that you know which solutions could be potentially irritating, because these are going to be used for about 12 hours all day long. And even having hand sanitizer on your hands for 12 hours at a time can be really irritating and can cause, cracks and drying of your hands. So be mindful of the time that those cleaning solutions are going to be used. And that's why we suggest gloves, which I'll talk more about in a minute. Next slide, please. So the bottles of disinfectant. So on the left, you'll see QT, TB, surface disinfectant. I call this QUAT. So the QUAT disinfectant can actually be somewhat irritating on your hands. This needs to be used with gloves. Furthermore, if you use it on the touchless hand sanitizer stations that are at some of the polling locations, it can actually break the electronics in them. So don't use it on that. This should be used on the voting locations, the actual station where the voters are going to be. The bottle on the right is hand sanitizer. Hand sanitizer can go on your hands, but again, just be mindful that if you use hand sanitizer all day, that alcohol can be really drying on your hands. It is best to wash your hands and not just use hand sanitizer. So the QUAT, always used with gloves. Hand sanitizer can be used with bare hands, but washing your hands is always best. And make sure that when you are talking to the election workers that day, you're educating them, because again, they're going to be distracted with the election. We want to make sure that it's easy for them to grab the right bottle, that they know which one to use for which task. And if you have other disinfectants available, like you might have wipes, for example, think about which disinfectants go to which tasks. The wipes, for example, might be great for if you're wiping down a tablet or a laptop, but you have to ask the election chief, make sure that it would be okay for the electronics if that gets wiped down with a wipe, for example. We don't want to break the electronics in the middle of the election day. So think about what you have at your disposal. And unfortunately, I can't tell you that every polling station is going to have the exact same resources at their disposal. So make sure you have a cup of coffee or tea and you're ready to go early in the morning or at the start of your shift and ready to look at what you've got and how you can apply it. Next station, please, or next slide, please. Okay, cleaning. So we talked about paper towels versus wipes. With the spray-on QUAT, you want to wipe that down with a paper towel. Wipes are when you have something like a Clorox wipe that can be used to disinfect a surface. Those can be nice, but they're probably going to be in very limited supply. You're more likely to have liquid disinfectants and paper towels in more abundance. And you do want to think about how much supply do you have, because you want to be able to make it through that whole day. You want to make sure that you don't run out of disinfectant right at that 5 or 6 p.m. voting rush. So think about how much disinfectant you're using. Ideally, it would be great if we could clean after every single voter. but that may not be possible. We want to clean as much as possible, but it may not be possible after every single one. We talked a little bit about who cleans. So this should be the election officers that are monitoring each station, and then when each station is vacated and the voter takes their ballot and goes to the machine to put it in, that's when that station should be cleaned. It should only take 5 to 10 seconds, should be pretty quick, spray, wipe, and you're done. It doesn't need to be a full disinfection after every single person, but it's good to have it wiped down very quickly. We need to make sure these polling stations stay open and keep getting people through, because we're balancing how clean the station is, how perfect our cleaning job is, with how many people are waiting outside and whether or not social distancing is being exactly followed there. So that's why I say we're never going to completely reduce the infection risk here down to 0, but we want to reduce it as much as possible by thinking about social distancing, but also thinking about cleaning each voting station. You also want to think about, again, your supplies, and talk to your election chief about how often they think that each station should be cleaned. What we did during peak was we had one person only doing cleaning, and they tried as best they could to clean every station after every single voter. And during the quieter times, we had someone who was able to do cleaning as well as another job. So we had people kind of rotate in and out during their breaks, and we had a lot of communication within our team about who was helping out with what. But again, you're not going to be there the whole day. So you're only going to be a part of that election team for a few hours. And so they need to function and be able to do that cleaning function even when you're not there. Next slide, please. All right, traffic flow. So we talked about one-way flow, if possible. And of course, we want to maintain that 6-foot distance. This is going to be a challenge, because if it's not very good weather in November, then people might have to wait outside, which may not be very comfortable for them. But we do have to maintain that 6-foot distance. So at my last station, we had some trouble trying to figure out the best way to weave people through the polling station and stop them from crossing each other and being in close proximity to each other. So you may need to use tape on the floor. We put down little X's on the floor that were 6 feet apart. You may need to use cones or tape between the cones. Your election chief will have resources to do that. And think about inside versus outside. As Jessica said, we may have a lot of voters on election day, or we may have fewer than we're expecting. Think about, where are people going to wait? How many people do you have that can wait at a time? And when you hit that first peak and you get through that first peak, what did it look like? How many people were in line? Talk to your election chief. Tell them if you have concerns about the number of people waiting in line, and where are we going to direct people to wait in line? Are we going to direct them to wait outside? Is there another hallway that we could use that would still be one way? Maybe we can have another entrance. So think about all the different footpaths and how to keep people protected from the outside elements as much as you can, while still maintaining that social distancing and making sure that the election itself is secure and sound. Next slide, please. Okay, so you will probably see a lot of barriers set up as soon as you get there. That's one of the things that the election chiefs have definitely been trained on, is having those barriers as much as they can between them and the voters to protect our voters as well as our polling workers. So you might see the plastic barriers that are shown on the picture here, like the plexiglass type barriers. You may also see shower curtains. Again, each station's going to vary. Our goal is to make sure that people can maintain distance, and if possible, when people have to be a little bit closer, like maybe if you're handing over your identification, that you have a barrier between. So when I say on this slide, minimize voting stations, maximize space between stations, we're not really minimizing voting stations, but you may see fewer than usual. They might, since we have to space out each voting station 6 feet apart, they may end up removing a couple to try and maintain distancing while people are voting. Because as Jessica said, there's a couple of constitutional amendments that are on the ballot, or Virginia state amendments, I guess, on the ballot, and therefore people might be reading for a few minutes, and therefore we do want them to be 6 feet apart while they're doing that. And we want to minimize person-to-person contact as much as possible. One of the things that we did at my last polling station was we had people behind one of those plexiglass barriers put up their license against the barrier. And so the person who was checking their identification just read it on the barrier. They never had to touch it. They never had to look at it, but I have served at another station where one of the workers had to take the license and look at it. Those are all calls done by the election chief. We can offer suggestions, but again, all of these decisions need to ultimately be made by the election chief. So minimize the person-to-person contact if you can, but make sure you respect that the election chief is in charge. Next slide. Okay, so think about what surfaces are commonly touched. So you could have a door monitor, for example, to make sure that that door is only being opened by one person all day and not hundreds of people. Think about whether or not to keep the doors open or closed. Think about if there's any other surfaces that people are commonly touching beyond doors. Is there anything else where people tend to touch the same item? I know with the ballot counters, one of the things that we used to do is hand the ballot to a person who would then put it into the ballot for you. What I've seen at the last few elections is we put the ballot, or the voters put the ballot directly in themselves to minimize that direct handoff. Jessica talked about the one-way transaction of the pens. We don't want people using the same pen all day. So you may very well have pens such that each voter gets a pen and then walks off with their pen or with their folder as well. So if your election chief has questions about that, you can advise them on how to minimize the number of surfaces that are touched by multiple people and the number of things that go back and forth. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's some of the tools you might see the day of. Jessica talks a little bit about masks. You may see face shields. So face shields are an optional addition. They can be a little bit annoying to wear. They can potentially offer some additional protection. CDC really focuses mostly on the masks and having 2-layer masks, whether they be cloth or the medical style masks. That's where CDC focuses, but some people choose to wear face shields in addition. You can do that. Barriers will be provided, signs will be provided, as will gloves, hand sanitizer. There will be hand washing areas at your polling location, like a restroom you can use, and other wipes. Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk a little bit about masks. So the purpose of masks is to protect, if I wear a mask, it's to protect you from me, but there's also new data out there that it may additionally protect me from you to some extent, especially with certain types of masks. So make sure that when you take a mask, when you choose a mask, you're choosing one that fits you well. So when you grab it, you want to make sure that you've got the metal piece on your nose and that you slide your fingers down so that it can fit as well as it can if it has a metal piece onto your face. When you communicate about masks to voters, we talked a little bit about this with Jessica, there will be the signage as well as we can verbally communicate and ask people to wear a mask. I've seen people completely legitimately forget to get their mask out of their car. So don't assume just because somebody is walking into the site without a mask that they're doing so deliberately. They may have just completely forgotten in their haste and their excitement about the election or their distraction with something else that's going on. And oftentimes if we politely say at the door, hey, would you mind getting a mask? They'll say, oh my gosh, and go back to their car and get it because they know they're supposed to wear it. So when you wear the mask, make sure you put it on properly. You do want to try and get something of a seal. Now, this is not a respirator. This is very different from a respirator, but you can tell if the mask fits you well, because if you breathe in and the mask sticks to your face a little bit, you know that the mask is actually filtering the air through, as opposed to if you breathe in and it's just all coming in through the sides of it, then it doesn't really fit you that well. If you have glasses like I do, and you find that your glasses are fogging up while wearing your mask, it often means that all of your air is leaking out here and not going through the mask itself. So sometimes that means step away from where you are, step away from other people, take off your mask, try and readjust it and see if that fixes the glasses fogging up problem. When you take it off, assume that this front surface here could potentially be contaminated. So you remove it and then you fold it such that that contaminated surface is on the inside. And then you can dispose of it or fold it such that you can put it in your pocket or something like that. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of what we talked about. When you're putting on your mask, wash your hands, open it, expand the pleats, orient the top of the mask, make sure the proper side of the mask faces outwards. For these medical style masks, it's usually going to be the blue side that's facing outwards, but I have seen people wear them backwards on accident. Place the mask on your face and slide your fingers down your nose, put your loops on your ears and do the basic mask fit test, which is essentially breathe in and make sure it's going through the mask, that the mask kind of clings to you a little bit when you take a breath in. Once it's on, don't adjust it, don't touch it, try not to. I know it's tempting, but if you need to step away and adjust your mask, step away from other people, adjust your mask, take a break with it off for a few seconds or whatever, and then put it back on and step back into your post. Next question, or next slide, please. Okay, so when you're taking your mask off, do make sure you tell people that if their mask becomes damaged or dirty or somebody coughs on it or they otherwise feel like they need to change their mask, they should. That's why we've provided masks to the poll workers. So wash your hands. Don't touch the front of that mask because, again, we're assuming that this part could be contaminated. Remove it with the ear loops, fold it, and dispose of it in the trash. Or if you're keeping your own personal mask, fold it, put it in your pocket. And then wash your hands because you could have touched something that somebody else could have, their respiratory particles could be on the outside of your mask. Next slide, please. If you choose to put on a face shield, you want to bend forward, make sure that your thumb's inside the straps and that you have the foam sitting on your forehead, and that you stretch the band, place it behind your head, and that it covers the front and the sides of your face. So if you haven't worn a face shield before, the idea of it is that it can block respiratory particles either from me going out to you, or if you happen to cough in my direction, it's an additional layer of protection that is completely optional that people can wear in case somebody coughs or something gets splashed on them. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk about gloves. This one always generates a little bit of controversy. So gloves are not necessary during COVID for most things at these polling stations because you can wash your hands. However, there are going to be people at the polling station that have more risk than others because of what they're touching. So if you have a polling station where your election workers need to be grabbing somebody's identification, that person should be wearing a glove, because that is a higher risk touch activity. If you have a poll worker who's going to be walking out to a car, handing somebody a ballot on a clipboard, letting them vote from their car, and then walking that ballot back after that person has touched it, they should be wearing gloves, because those are surfaces that voters have been known or already known to have touched. So those are the times when I want people to wear gloves. We do not have enough gloves for, unfortunately, everybody to be wearing gloves all day. And if you've never worn gloves all day, it's very uncomfortable. Your hands get very sweaty. It's not very fun to wear gloves all day. So you don't want to do that. You can also choose when to wear 2 gloves and when to wear 1. And this is where, again, it gets confusing. Because if I put on 1 glove, this hand is contaminated with whatever I'm touching, like if I'm holding an identification. Maybe with this hand, I'm typing on the computer because I need to look up this voter with the identification. This would be a good time to wear 1 glove because then I can slide that identification back and the laptop that I've been using remains uncontaminated. And as long as I remember that this gloved hand should not touch this computer, then I'm good to go. And I don't have to worry about that computer being contaminated if somebody after me uses the computer. Obviously, they'd want to wipe it down since I've used it, but it's unlikely to be indirectly touched by the voters because of those identifications. So that's one time to potentially wear 1 glove. If you're walking out to a car and holding multiple items for a voter, you might want to have 2 gloves. And we do need to talk about how to properly remove gloves. First of all, what gloves to wear? We do suggest nitrile gloves, not latex. Latex can cause allergies, so nitrile gloves will be what's provided for you. How to properly remove your gloves. So if you've never done this before, try to follow along with me. If I've got 2 gloves on, everybody wants to they try and take off a glove, this hand and go like this. Well, guess what? This hand's got a glove on it. So you've just contaminated this whole part of your wrist. You don't want to do that. First thing you want to do when you have 2 gloves is grab in the middle of your hand. And you want to pull off this glove by touching only the glove. You don't want to touch the bottom here. You want to touch only the glove. Pull this off. And now I've got a free hand and I'm holding this other glove. And I can use this free, clean hand to slide underneath this glove, turn everything inside out, and I can dispose of it without having touched either of the insides. So let me do that one more time. Use your hand, pinch the palm area, pull that one off. So now you're holding both gloves. And then this is a clean hand. Take this and slide it under and make sure that you've got your 2 gloves and flip it inside out so that the dirty surface is on the inside. And then you can dispose of that. So make sure that you also wash your hands anytime you're taking off gloves, especially if you're taking off your gloves because you touched something that somebody else has touched. Next slide, please. Taking off your face shield is a little easier. Tilt your head, grab the strap, pull it forward, and then you can dispose of it. So pretty easy, but again, anytime you're taking off PPE, you need to wash your hands afterwards. And also know that PPE it's not perfect. It's not going to magically protect you, and that's why we want to make sure that you always think about washing your hands, whether you're taking off a mask or taking off your face shield or taking off gloves. Make sure you go through the additional step of washing your hands. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk about some opportunities to minimize touch. We've talked about licenses and identification. One-way transactions as much as possible. So we talked a little bit about pens and having that folder to keep. A lot of the places have unfortunately removed the I voted stickers. I know a lot of people like them, but sometimes they'll have an I voted like table if they are still keeping the I voted stickers so that people can come and remove their ticket or their sticker only. And that way one person lays them all out, somebody else comes, grabs, and then goes to their car. So nobody's handing them out directly like they used to. Those pens, people are going to take those, be given those, and then walk away with them. One-way transaction. Ballots into the counting machines, we talked a little bit about. The people are going to be probably putting their own ballots into the counting machine so that we're not handing them to somebody who's then going to put them in to minimize touch. And the clipboards, again, a great time to wear gloves. Just make sure that the person who's doing that, try to talk to them before they do that the first time, and just make sure that they're mindful. It's all too easy if you've got two gloves on and you're holding something that somebody else has touched to, like, you know, wipe your forehead or adjust your mask or whatever. It's so easy to do that. And just make sure you've coached them. You make sure their mask is on and it's all set, put on the gloves. And from once the gloves are on, assume that they're contaminated, grab that clipboard, do your thing, put in the ballot, put the clipboard down, take off the gloves, go wash your hands, and then they're good to go. Next slide, please. Okay, other safety considerations. So think about, as Jessica said, other things can happen during the day, not just medical emergencies that are not due to COVID, but things like slips, trips, and falls. You know, if you have somebody spills water, make sure that that gets cleaned up. So you, as an infection prevention ambassador, can also just help be mindful of public safety and public health in general. Look out for walkways or stairs or door thresholds where people could easily trip. If it's raining, think about maybe adding a mat near the door so that people can dry their feet so that these gym surfaces, etc., don't become too slippery. If you notice anything like this or see any opportunities for improvement, talk to your election chief and just say, hey, can we get some kind of a mat or something like that because it's raining, or some other suggestion that you have. Hopefully this doesn't happen, but in case of an evacuation, think about where the emergency exits are. When I got to my polling site last time, the election chief immediately told everybody, if an alarm goes off, this is the way we're going to go. So they should be aware of that, and they should be telling you where the emergency evacuation sites are. But if they're not, feel free to ask. They might, again, have just forgotten to share with everybody. And also think about, what if the line becomes long? What are you going to do if the line becomes long outside? Because you don't want that poor line to be stretching into traffic. If you're on a major road, you don't want somebody to be too close to traffic and be unsafe. So think about where you will extend that line during the peak times, and how long that line could get and what you will do for that kind of overflow if it does, while still maintaining social distancing and the integrity of the election. And again, you're not expected to do all of this on your own. Just think about it and bring your ideas to the election chief, because they're thinking about this stuff too. They've talked through COVID. They know a lot of this, but you're there to be the eyes and ears of public health and to think of these things and bring them up with the election chief. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are going to be sharing spaces during our shift with the other election workers. So be mindful of, you're sharing a restroom. Be mindful that you're sharing water fountains. You know, of course, you can bring your own water and you need to bring your own food. And you're also potentially sharing a break room. There is a break room for the election workers. And make sure that you're respectful of, if you're taking off your mask because you're far away from others and you're in a separate area, that nobody's in that area with you if you're taking your break there. Sometimes the election workers may ask you where they can take their mask off. And what I would suggest is find an area that's way more than 6 feet away from other people that is not considered a common space. Even if they need to just walk back to their car for a break, they can do that. But just make sure if somebody's removing their mask that they're not going to be near others. So while you're walking through your polling station on your day, make sure you think about any other spaces that this group is utilizing, because this group is going to be there from 5 a.m. until maybe 8 or 9 p.m. They're going to eat a lot of meals there. They're going to drink a lot of water or coffee or soda or whatever. They're going to need to take a lot of breaks and restroom breaks. So they're also people who need to be, as much as possible, protected from that risk of infection. And so you can coach them about maybe putting some wipes into their common area, or making sure that the restroom is adequately stocked with soap and hand sanitizer if they run out of soap. So think about these spaces and how you can help the people that you're serving that day. Next slide, please. Food safety. So when I went to my last election, they told me that they were really disappointed that they couldn't share food the usual way, because these election workers have often worked with each other for years, if not decades. They know each other oftentimes. And they want to socialize and catch up because they only get to see each other every once in a while. And they spend these long chunks of time with each other. And so they want to share food and relax together. And the ones that I talked to said that they were upset that COVID was changing the fact that they couldn't share food like they usually do and do their potluck. But unfortunately, because of the times we live in, it is ideal to have prepared food. So if the group asks you how to most safely do food, here's the suggestions I would have is if you do get food brought in from the outside, make sure one person's serving it, that they have a mask, that it's not buffet style, everybody touching the same spoon, etc. That you get one plate per trip and you dispose of it and get a new plate rather than touching that spoon to your plate that potentially has your saliva on it. And make sure you consider gloves for the server, if that seems appropriate, disposable items, separate bottles. So instead of having one coffee thing that everyone touches, maybe if you have one big coffee thing, set out some cups of coffee. If somebody with gloves can do that, wash your hands, put on the gloves, and then set out drinks for everybody, or have individual water bottles. Wipe surfaces before and after, especially if you're eating in an area, your respiratory particles can go all over that table. So it is kind to wipe down the table after you use it, after you take a break. And again, you can use hand sanitizer if washing your hands isn't available, but it's always best to wash your hands instead of using the hand sanitizer. Next slide. All right, so what to do once voting begins. Next slide, please. Make sure that when you're interacting with the voters that you're encouraging them, they can use hand sanitizer. At my last station, we had some hand sanitizer that was for us that we did not want to run out of, and some that was for public use. So make sure you ask your election chief which one's for public use, same with the masks, and which one's just for you. You can encourage masks like Jessica talked about, but you can't force anyone to wear a mask. You can make sure you avoid direct contact. If you're talking to a voter, you're probably mostly going to be talking to the polling workers, but if you're talking to a voter, stay that physical distancing 6 foot away. Next slide, please. So what about voters with special needs? So we can walk to cars, or rather the election workers can walk to the cars and help people vote from there, and use the clipboard. And make sure as much as possible that it's a one-way transaction. It's not really easy to do with a car, but if you can have that person keep that pen, they can't keep the clipboard, but if you can make sure that we just get the clipboard and the ballot back, and the ballot goes into the machine and then the clipboard goes back, we can wipe it down with a wipe, then we can try and minimize touch as much as possible and make sure that worker takes off those gloves and washes their hands as soon as possible. They should not do anything else. They should walk back in, take off those gloves, go wash, and then go back to their station. And again, make sure that everybody maintains distance, however they're voting, whether it be in the car or waiting outside. Next slide. Symptomatic voters. We touched on this a little bit. Voters reporting symptoms should be encouraged to use alternative voting options. So I think it's possible a voter may walk up and say, hey, I feel really cruddy today. What should I do? And I think that the election workers should be trained to tell them, if you go to your car, we can help you vote from your car. And that way they don't have to wait in the facility. They may also have drive-up voting options. Different facilities are going to have different options as far as voting in the car versus drive-up voting from the vehicle. But there will be assistance for people. Nobody has to vote inside the facility. We can always come out to people. And if you have questions or concerns about somebody, just like Jessica said, go to the election chief and ask them. Next slide, please. What to do if tensions run high? So reassure the voter that your job is to protect safety, but also to make sure, like all the other election workers, that they have the right to vote. Your job is not to take away their right to vote. Even if they're symptomatic, even if they're belligerent, they still have a right to vote. So slow down, remain calm, repeat what you heard, ask them to repeat themselves if you don't understand, but mostly get help. Make sure that the election chief is aware if there's some kind of a situation. They should be the ones who are dealing with this because they're the ones who are trained to deal with concerns or anything with voters and tensions running high. You can contact your MRC POC, of course, but the first person would be that election chief. Next slide. All right, demobilization. Last topic I want to talk about is what to do to clean up your space. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is we talked about putting that election ballot into the machine. Well, now we've got a pile of election ballots that have been touched by all these different voters. That could potentially be contaminated, and we can't disinfect the ballots. So make sure that you talk to the polling workers about what are you going to do with that pile of ballots that other people have touched. Maybe they should grab those with gloves. Maybe they should still be wearing their mask even if nobody else is around. Maybe they should have a special container they put those into if that's the way that they handle the ballots. Take off their gloves and go wash their hands and then close that container so that they don't have to touch that anymore. How are they going to clean the space down? Are they going to wipe everything down so that if an event is happening the next day at that school, that it's not affected? What can and can't be cleaned? The number one thing for those election chiefs is going to be handling those ballots safely and securely. So we cannot interfere with that. But we can advise them, and we may not be there for the end of the shift, but we can advise them on, hey, be mindful when you're demobilizing today about wiping everything down, about what's potentially been touched by voters. You can, at the end of the day, disinfect the surfaces that have been touched. And even during voting too, if somebody coughs on something, you can stop and not stop, but once that voter has gone through, then you can disinfect that area just a little bit extra because somebody coughed on it. Or if somebody went by without a mask, you can again disinfect that area when they went by. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. This has been a great presentation, and we so appreciate all of the information that you gave. We're going to hold the questions just through these last few slides because I think a lot of them relate to a lot of the things that you said. So I'll move forward with the last few slides about election day deployment, and then we can take questions that Pat may have in gotten in the chat. So for the volunteer responsibilities, just wanted to reiterate a few things that we may have mentioned through our previous slides. On the day of your service for the elections, make sure that you sign up for your shift. Sign up for your shift both in the alert previous to the elections, and then also make sure that on the day of that you're making sure that you check in, and we'll go over how to do that. Let us know beforehand as soon as possible if you can't show. If you know that you're sick 2 or 3 days before, or you have something that comes up, maybe a personal issue or event that makes it to where you can't show, please let us know. There may be someone who can fill in for your in your place, so we just need to know that information as soon as possible. Make sure to wear your MRC shirt. If you have a COVID-19 shirt, please do wear it. Also your badge, as Jennifer mentioned earlier, and make sure that you're wearing other clothing that allows you to be comfortable and also presentable. So make sure you're wearing slacks and comfortable shoes, things like that, because you will be standing on your feet for a while through the day. Also, make sure that you know who you're accountable to. So make sure you know who your unit leader is. And then also, we will be giving some additional contact information in just a moment that you can contact someone if you can't get in touch with your individual unit leader, because as you know, there are going to be a lot of polling locations that are that they're working at through the day, so your unit leader may be busy. And if you have an urgent question, we have somebody else that we can get you in contact that will also notify your unit leader if that situation comes up. Also, when we send out a check-in, we'll usually send it out through an alert or some other mechanism that will send you a Google survey that will allow you to check in. And then you can fill out that survey and it will automatically show us that you have arrived at your polling center. And then we will be making sure that we let all of the contacts for the day, such as your MRC unit leaders, et cetera, know that through our system of communication. So on November the 3rd for your deployment, as was mentioned earlier, make sure that you introduce yourself to the election chief. Make notes on the action log that's located in your in the job action sheet, and then also brief the next volunteer. So when you switch over for the day, let's say that you have a 4 or 5 hour length of time that you're at the polling location, make sure to let the next person know, kind of give them a warm handoff and let them know what has happened and anything that they may need to know that happened throughout your shift. If there's not anyone there, that's fine. Just maybe talk to one of your polling center location representatives and make sure that they know that you're leaving so that, as Jennifer mentioned, that they can take over those cleaning duties. Also, if you're able to, take a selfie or pictures of yourself and anyone else who is happy to be in a picture. Always ask, please. And feel free to tag that to the Virginia MRC on Facebook or Instagram. We're going to be looking for a lot of pictures that day and cultivating those for things that we do in the future for other trainings and things like that to promote your good work. And we talked about introducing yourself. So we do have a letter of introduction on our website, which I will be showing to you at the end of the presentation. And this just explains who you are and what you're doing at the polling location that day. As was mentioned by Jessica earlier on, they're going to be a little busy there. So just making sure that you have a good understanding of who to check in with and that they understand your purpose and rationale for being there. And then the state elections MRC coordinator is point of contact is Pat Minen, and he is in the chat box tonight. Wave for us, Pat. His contact information is at the very bottom of this letter of introduction. So feel free to keep that on hand with you. And that will also be on our website so that you can pull that off. Pat is going to be our kind of centrally coordinated elections chief on the MRC side for the day. He has a lot of the information, and he's been the one that's been doing all of the footwork and legwork for MRC on the election side. So he is kind of the brain trust of the situation, and we're going to be utilizing that a lot through the day on November the 3rd. So when we talk about the polling site infection prevention action log, this is located within the job action sheet that Jennifer mentioned earlier. So this has some good information on time in, time out, and who your election chief is so that you can kind of keep up with those things. Also goes over additional planning considerations for the polling site layout, etc. So just be sure to look through that prior to the day of your post, and then also make sure to bring that along with you for the day of your deployment. So interacting with the media. We highly suggest that you don't, but if you do have to speak to some of the media, please make sure that they know who to contact for more information. We really don't have a lot to do that day as in terms of infection prevention ambassadors, so we really don't have time to be discussing with the media, but we do have someone at VDH, likely our state coordinator, Jennifer Freeland, will be the one that interacts with the media. So if you do have any questions or someone asked to have more of an interview, etc., please direct them to the VAMRC.org where they can get in contact with us. And then COVID questions. So if you end up having any kind of COVID questions, you can always reach out. If they're of an urgent nature, you can certainly reach out directly to your unit leaders, etc. But if you just need some general information, maybe people are, have a question that they need answering, or maybe you have your own question for the day, you can always find very good, valuable information here at vdh.virginia.gov//coronavirus/, and that will show you real-time data, I believe up to the day or two prior. So in review, the purpose of the VA MRC and elections is we are really there to prevent infections. We are there to also make sure that everyone has a safe voting experience, but we are not there to interfere. So make sure that you're aware of polling location operations and those election regulations, but make sure that you're in a position that you're not interfering with those. Our role as an infection prevention ambassador is simply to make sure that we are identifying those situations which could lead to infection, and we're minimizing those and mitigating those, which means to kind of stop those from happening. Also, infection prevention education and strategies. We've shared a lot of information today, and the slides will be available on our website, which I'll show to you on the next slide. I know that this is a lot of education, especially if you've been kind of in a non-medical role previously. So, feel free to flip through these slides and get a little bit more acclimated with the information we've shared tonight, and make sure that you're ready on the day of. Also, the communication guidelines. So as we mentioned, save those media contacts for our MRC coordinator leads. We won't need to be doing any media discussions that day. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any of those questions. And then volunteer responsibilities, which we've gone over at length today. So feel free to look back through the slide deck and make sure that you understand those roles and responsibilities. So for all of these resources for the infection prevention ambassadors on election day, you can go to the VDH MRC website with /IPA elections. There is where you're going to log your attendance for today's training. And then you're also going to have the job action sheet, training slides. The action log will be within the job action sheet, as I mentioned earlier. And then also the letter, a template letter of the introduction will also be there for you to view. Pat, do we have any questions that came up through the chat?
Yes, we have some questions for Jennifer. The first one is about water fountains. If they have water fountains at the polling sites, should they be turned off? I know a lot of places I go now, the water fountains are not working.
So we can't really turn them off. That's going to be a facility decision. It's potentially advisable to turn them off since you push that one button and everybody pushes that same button. But if they are still on and they're going to be used during your shift, you can wipe them down and coach people to make sure that they wipe them down after each use. We do want to make sure that our polling workers do have enough access to water. So whether they're on or off is not going to be in our control, but we can teach people to make sure that they wash their hands before using them and after using them, or wipe them down with a wipe before they use them.
Okay. Another question is, if there's a medical emergency, do we just, and someone faints, do we just call 911, or do we find the chief of that location, or what do we do?
Yeah, so if somebody's having a medical emergency, don't put yourself at risk in order to help somebody. I know that sounds kind of cold and heartless, but we don't want any of our volunteers getting injured or exposed to COVID by trying to help. If you call 911, EMTs have the appropriate equipment to help people. That being said, situations like CPR, those are really, really tough calls to make. And people can only decide that based on what they are personally comfortable with, if somebody needs CPR on scene, for example. But if I were at a scene and somebody collapsed and they needed help, I would be calling 911 while walking over to my election chief to notify them that somebody needed help.
Okay. can you reuse gloves? You may have said this. Can you reuse gloves by washing them like washing your hands?
That can actually damage the permeability of gloves. So gloves only have so many uses, and that's partially why the supplies are limited. So if you reuse gloves over and over again, things can start to go through them, which again, since we're always washing our hands when we use gloves anyway, is not a huge deal, but you don't want to have a false sense of protection for your gloves. So I don't suggest washing them and reusing them. If you need to take off your gloves, take them off, dispose of them, wash your hands, get a new pair next time.
Okay. How often should, and you may have said this too, how often should voting stations be wiped down, or how often should bathrooms be cleaned? How do you determine that?
I would say as far as the bathrooms, it needs to be cleaned by the user, because we're not going to have professional cleaning crews in there cleaning the bathrooms during the polling day. And there will only be a few polling workers. Jessica mentioned it could be as low as 3 plus you, maybe a couple other people. So it may be actually a small amount of people that are using the restroom. So they may just want to grab a paper towel, wipe off the sink after they use it, just as a courtesy for the people who are coming after them, wipe off the doorknob. So you can coach people to just be mindful that they don't want to infect each other if one of them is ill and doesn't know it. And that as far as the bathroom stations, you can talk about that with the team. And then as far as cleaning after each voter, again, it's ideal to do that. That's what we'd like, is just a quick 5-second spray down, wipe down, next voter in. After each voter, but as polls are really going quickly, that may be very difficult to do. So it's going to have to be a process and a coordination as to whether or not you want to clean all the stations at once, whether or not you want to have one person who jumps between stations as they're being opened up. That's something that you're going to have to work with the team on, and what they think is best based on the amount of peaks and how many people are there that day.
Okay. We have questions about gloves again. A lot of polling sites I don't think are going to have a large supply of gloves.
Mm-hmm.
So if an MRC volunteer is not really doing hands-on work with people, they're just staying 6 feet apart and encouraging people to wear a mask and to
Correct.
stay 6 feet apart, do they need to wear gloves, or do they need to bring their own in case they're not?
Yeah, you don't need to wear gloves, and they're kind of an optional thing. They're basically to decrease the likelihood that you'll touch something somebody else touches and then touch your face. That's what gloves are designed to prevent in this case. And so if you can remember, if you're holding a license, for example, not to touch your face, even if your nose is itchy or whatever, then theoretically you don't need a glove, but gloves can be very helpful because they can help remind people, oh gosh, I've been touching licenses with this hand. I need to rub my nose with this hand, which is clean, or step away for a minute and wash my hands and then rub my nose. They can just be helpful reminders. And I saw a question on the purpose of gloves, if you assume that they're contaminated when they're on. The gloves are just reminders that you should not be touching your face. And so, no, they're not immediately contaminated when you put them on, but as soon as you have gloves on your hands, you should be thinking, don't touch your face.
Okay. We have a couple volunteers who have beards. If they just wear a regular cloth mask, is that really going to protect them or protect others from any germs they may have? Or do they need to wear 2 masks? Or
that's a good question. And that's a tough one because masks can be different sizes. So I don't know if you've seen that they make children's masks as well as larger masks for people who have bigger faces or potentially even beards. I would suggest if you have a beard or a bigger face that you get a mask that actually covers your nose and mouth such that you can talk and interact with people without that mask shifting up and down or sliding around. So those people might end up needing a bigger size mask. Cloth masks may come in big enough sizes, but sometimes it's really about the shape and the fit to your face and what works well for you. So try and, you can try a pair of sunglasses and see if they fog up to see if the air is leaking out of here. You can try that test that I described where you see if the air is actually being pulled through the mask. But if you do find that your mask is sliding around, it's probably not a good fit for you and you should try another one.
Okay, a couple more questions. The polling site, of course, should be set up before we get there, and they should have thought of a lot of these things already, the flow of the traffic and setting up plexiglass screens. But is there any way to make sure they've done that before our volunteers show up? I guess the volunteer could just talk to their unit coordinator and make sure they've talked to the registrar, but I don't know if there's anything else we can really do beforehand.
reach out to your MRC coordinator if you have any questions beforehand. And the election officers are getting similar training to this. They are going to be aware of things like the plexiglass barriers and the disinfectants and wearing masks and what to do for voters who are not wearing masks. They're talking about these same types of topics, but I want to make sure you all are aware in case you see something that could be a potential improvement that other people might not have thought of. You've got a different perspective and a different set of eyes, and so you may catch things that the election experts might not have thought of.
Okay. And do you think it's acceptable dress to wear leggings and shoes with no socks?
I think as long as you look professional and you are comfortable for the course of the day and you would feel comfortable representing the Virginia Department of Health and the MRC, that you've got your shirt on, as long as you look professional, that should be good.
Okay. And I don't know, the only other question that I can't answer over here that I see is, do you know if there were any COVID transmissions reported during the primary elections?
So my MRC coordinator at least told us that there were no known cases amongst MRC volunteers that had gotten COVID as a result of their serving with the MRC, which is great news. I don't know whether that was just for my section or whether that was for the state, but please do reach out to your MRC coordinator if you have any questions about that.
I can echo that a bit, Jennifer. So to our knowledge, and again, this is to our knowledge because there is no 100% proof of COVID anywhere right now. But to our knowledge, we have not had any reported through any of our interactions with the public, both with voting or other deployments such as vaccinations, etc. So, and just to add very quickly, that if we are wearing our PPE properly and making sure that you are wearing those masks, it really does reduce the potential for that transmission. So, we say these things, with a lot of heart to please take these into your interactions throughout the day and make sure that you're utilizing these steps for yourself as well so that you can represent well both the MRC and VDH and also kind of model those behaviors as well for other people. We know that scientifically that's a really big thing in terms of modeling behavior, and that really goes a long way for other people to do the right things that day.
Jennifer, I have another question.
Sure.
This was discussed a little bit before, but if you get to the site to volunteer and the polling chief says, I want you to clean all day and that's all I want you to do, is that okay?
So I would say to the chief, my goal and my job as far as what VDH has told me to do is to look around the site and see opportunities for infection prevention and infection minimization. So I would ask, can I do that? And can I assist with that? And then I would say, I'm happy to assist with cleaning a little bit, but please know that I'm not going to be able to serve the whole day. And therefore, your team needs to be prepared to clean when I'm not here. So we should work together in order to make sure that these polling stations get cleaned. An MRC volunteer is not necessarily going to be here the whole time to do that. So I would make them aware that this is a process that needs to not be dependent upon having an MRC person there.
Right. And if along the same lines, if the election chief says anything to do with, COVID prevention is up to this MRC volunteer, see them, then that's not really accurate. It should be a team effort and they should have a plan in place before we even get there.
Exactly. They should have many of these things that I've mentioned already done. We're just a second set of eyes.
I think those are all the main questions that I can't answer.
And I just wanted to say, be a positive influence. People ask what to do if the election workers themselves are not wearing masks. Wear your mask, stand 6 feet away from people. I know it's weird. It feels like you're shouting at somebody to stand far away from them and talk to them, but be a positive influence and be a positive model, like Megan said. And I think that goes a long way.
Thank you. So with that, I just want to check in with Adrenia to see if we have any other updates or anything needed else to be said, but I do want to just take a moment to also say thank you so much for joining tonight and taking the hour and a half plus out of your time. We so appreciate you being here. We appreciate your your willingness to help out both at the polling places in terms of infection prevention, but also in support of our democratic elections. It's extremely important to our country and our democracy, and making sure that our public health is maintained doing so is of the top priority right now, given the COVID pandemic. So thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for coming and being willing to assist with us through being in these infection prevention ambassadors.